There are no strings on me.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is your boy Carnage, your primitive AK here, back with another video for you guys today. Today we are here with a full settings and sensitivity guide for both console and PC, controller, mouse, and keyboard. I haven't really done PC at all, and a lot of people asked me to do PC, so I figured it'd be fair if I show some love over to the PC folks over there. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe. Let's try to get 150 likes on this video. I'd greatly appreciate it if we could hit that like goal for this video. And if you guys have been recently watching my videos but not subbed to the channel, make sure you guys hit that sub button. We're on the road to 13,000 subs, so let's get right into the video talking about the best settings and sensitivity. So we're going to start off with console, work our way to PC. And for console, right off the bat, your controller settings, you're going to want to be rocking the default button layout, default stick layout. If you're using a scuff controller, leave this all on default. If you do not have a scuff controller, I recommend you swap this out for tactical. What tactical is going to do is it's going to swap out your crouching and sliding buttons from the circle button over to the R3 button. That way you don't have to take your hands off of the thumbstick. But if you have a scuff controller, obviously your paddles are on the back to use the circle button, so leave that on default if you have a scuff. Stick layout, don't touch that. You really don't need to mess with any of these unless by some reason you're actually a god by using these different types of button layouts, which are kind of weird in my opinion. Inverted look, don't touch it. Dead zone, I made a video covering dead zone. If you guys would like to check that video out, annotation will be on the screen. I'll link it in the video so you guys can go ahead and check that out. But if you do not have any type of stick drift whatsoever, or random dead drift, or whatever it's called, leave this on 0.05. I'm pretty sure that's default. You can even set it all the way to off if you really want to. That's entirely up to you. But I noticed my settings were fine, so you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing. Now your settings for your sensitivity. This is pretty much something you're going to have to play with. I mention this every time I make a settings video. You're going to have to play with these settings, figure out what works best for you. But I will say this, the lower your sensitivity is, the better your aim will be. I know there's sometimes this massive misconception that you need to play on a high sensitivity to quote unquote turn on people faster. That is irrelevant. I'm still turning on people using a 6 sensitivity, so you can do it too. I know some players that are actually legitimate pro players that are actually playing on a 4 sensitivity and a 4-4 both on horizontal and vertical, but 6-6 works best for me. You'll just have to play around with it, see what works best for you. And I mean, if you are good at a high sensitivity, by all means play on a high sensitivity, because my buddy Will plays all the way at a 15 sensitivity, so and he's very good with that and he's comfortable with that. So you'll have to play around with it, figure out what works best. If you're missing shots and you're overcompensating for your target, turn this down. If you're not aiming enough on your target, then you turn it up. That's pretty much how you want to gauge that. Your ADS sensitivity multiplier, put this on 0.76. I've noticed this has actually helped me out a lot. What it does is it actually reduces your aim assist just by a tad bit when you're ADSing your weapon. And if you're using a sniper as well, this will be set to 1.0. So when I have a sniper on, I have this at 0.85. When you have a regular just iron sight like an M4 or an SMG, for example, this is at 0.75. So definitely recommend that. Aim assist, like I mentioned, I covered in a video in depth, but the long story short is, if you're a very good player, put this on linear. If you're new to the game or you're just kind of getting used to the feel of things and you're just testing the waters, leave this on standard. Standard is going to compensate for any miscalculations in your aim, I guess you could say. That'd be one way to put it. Linear is going to calculate things based off of your own input on the controller stick. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you're pretty good at the game. Controller vibration, turn it off. I've explained this numerous times. Don't play with vibration. If you're playing with vibration, you're doing it wrong. There is no benefit whatsoever to using vibration on your controller. And I've actually seen people tell me that they want to get the feel of a weapon while using vibration. Just turn it off. You don't need it. I promise you, you do not need it at all. You're actually making yourself a worse player using vibration. Aim assist. Like I mentioned, I talked about this in another video. I know I say this a lot, but I want to stress that I did cover this specifically in a video, so annotation will be on the screen if you want to check that out. If you are very good at the game and you have very good aim, you're a god at the game, you drop nukes every single game, you're that type of player who sweats his nuts off with an MP5 or M4, leave this on either standard or precision. Now, what focusing is going to do is, if you're bad at the game, you're casual, you're just not very good, you play like an hour a week and you're just having trouble getting your aim up, no offense to you guys out there that are actually like that, but you're going to want to put this on focusing. Now, what focusing is going to do is, this is going to actually create a sort of invisible bubble around your target. And when you aim in the general direction of that bubble, your weapon is basically going to become an aimbot and stick onto that target. And this is why I mentioned, if you're good at the game, do not use focusing, because this is going to quite literally throw off your aim if you're very good at the game, and it's going to aim within that bubble when in reality you're actually aiming at the target. But like I mentioned, if you're bad at the game, use focusing. It'll help compensate. Precision, what it does is it actually compensates for your aim at very long extreme ranges. So that's why I've been messing around with precision. But if you're comfortable where you're at and you're good at the game, just leave it on standard. It's not going to hurt. But if you want to know what aimbot feels like, put on focusing. Weapon mount activation, leave that on ADS and melee. Weapon mount movement, leave that on enabled. ADS behavior, put it on hold. Equipment on hold. Use and reload behavior. This is a pretty big one. So if you regularly play multiplayer, and that's all you do is play multiplayer, or if you very rarely play Warzone, leave this on tap to reload. This is pretty much standard Call of Duty settings. You press square to reload, and that's what it's going to do. When you play Warzone, you're going to have to hold square to open doors, hold square to open up caches in Warzone, hold square to pick up a weapon in Warzone. The same thing in multiplayer, hold square to pick up a weapon. But if you play Warzone, or you just want to play Warzone for a couple games, or you play Warzone all the time, put this on contextual tap. This is going to save your life. I promise you it will save your life. It saved mine. It's going to be weird to get used to, but what it's going to change is every time that you have to reload your weapon, it's going to swap the same characteristics that I mentioned previously, where you hold square. It's going to swap that out, and it's going to make it so that way you have to press square to open a door, press square to open up a chest, press square to pick up a weapon, and then you have to hold square to reload your weapon. That's what contextual tap does. Now you're probably thinking that now you're getting an idea of what this is actually going to do. So let's say you're dropping into Warzone and you have a player that's flying next to you and he's trying to steal the weapon that's on the ground on top of Superstore. What contextual tap is going to help you out with, the player next to you, if he has his settings set to standard on tap to reload, he has to hold square to pick up that weapon. If you have contextual tap on, all you have to do is press square and it picks up the weapon immediately. So you can actually pick up weapons faster than another player if they don't have this setting on, and this is going to literally save your life. There have been moments on stream where this has actually helped me out. So definitely recommend, if you play Warzone, by all means, please change this to contextual tap. It will literally save your life. You won't believe it until you see it, but it's actually insane. Deeply ammo weapon switch, I don't touch this at all. Just leave that on enabled. Slide behavior, set it to tap. This is set to hold by default, but you don't want to hold the crouch button to slide. That's actually kind of an inconvenience, so leave that on tap. Auto move forward, don't touch it. Automatic sprint, some people actually like this. I don't like it at all. So I just leave it off. It actually messes me up and gets me killed sometimes, because I actually had the setting on by mistake when I was doing a settings video a while ago. Vehicle camo recenter, leave that on enabled. Parachute auto deploy on enabled as well. That only works for multiplayer, ground war, co-op, and Warzone modes, so that doesn't happen for any other type of regular mode. So general, leave brightness on 50%. Depends on your monitor. You might want to tweak that a bit. Your safe area depends on your monitor as well. Film grain, don't touch it. Film grain is terrible, shouldn't be in a game at all. Tooltips, leave it on enabled. Subtitles, I leave it on enabled, but if it's annoying, you can leave it on disabled. It's entirely up to you. I like to know what's going on in the game, so I kind of leave that on. Language selection, English, or if you're French, put that on French also. Entirely up to you. Colorblind, a lot of people like to mess with these colorblind settings. I guess it makes your game look cool. A lot of people really aren't colorblind. They just kind of turn it on because it looks cool. Like, Tritanopia, whatever it's called, does look pretty nice, not gonna lie, but I don't really mess with that. Motion blur, weapon motion blur, and world motion blur, turn it off. You don't need it. All it is there to make your game look cool. Just turn it off. It's trash. I don't understand why games keep putting that in their games. But you don't need it, so just leave it off. Minimap shape, leave it to square. You're going to get more coverage on your minimap as opposed to circle, as you guys can see right there. Minimap rotation, keep that on enabled. Compass cardinal direction text, leave that on letters. I don't really feel a need to touch that. You could put it on numbers also if you want, but I like letters and numbers. It looks cool. Text chat enabled. Profanity filter, I don't really care for that. You know, that's entirely up to you, and the rest of those settings don't really matter. Audio settings, I leave this on boost low. If you're playing Warzone, put this on boost high. It's going to boost up some sounds across the map that you may not have been able to hear a while ago. But if you're playing ground war or any 66 mode, you can leave this on either home theater or just boost low. It's entirely up to you. Play around with it, see what works best. Juggernaut music, I don't use Juggernaut, so yeah. Hit marker sound effects, that's entirely up to you. A lot of people like to use classic. I don't really care. I mean, it's not going to help you get better at the game with whatever hit marker sound you use, so that's entirely up to you. Voice chat, leave it on enabled because I like to hear trash talk. Open mic recording threshold, this was kind of a setting that I don't really touch. It was on 3.16 when I first bought the game, so I just kind of left it on 3.16. I don't touch it, and everything else is set to default. And that's pretty much it for the console settings. We're going to hop over to PC settings and show you guys the best settings for PC. There are some settings that we need to cover, and hopefully you guys can get a better idea of what the best settings are on PC. We're also going to talk about controller on PC, so let's go ahead and swap right over. Alright, welcome back everybody. We are here on PC this time, covering the best settings to use on PC, both for controller and mouse and keyboard. We're going to be covering mouse and keyboard first, and we're going to talk into some controller settings too as well to move for this one. So let's talk about the biggest one that everybody wants to know, mouse sensitivity. This one's going to have to be something that you play with. Like I mentioned, sensitivity is based on the player, not based on what your favorite content creator uses. Obviously, the lower the better. I believe a lot of pro players on PC, a lot of big streamers use around 7.15. 6.96 seems to be the sweet spot for me. I may even turn this up a little bit more, but this is also dependent on your DPI settings of my mouse. Now my mouse does have, which is a Logitech mouse, it actually does have a DPI changer, so I can switch DPI settings. Right now I'm on an 800 DPI and a mouse sensitivity of 6.96, so I recommend your DPI be around 800. Also, you want to ensure that any type of acceleration is off. I know the in-game acceleration is actually set to 0 by default, but there is also a Windows mouse acceleration setting that you will need to turn off completely. I believe Windows has it on by default, so if you're on PC and you're playing mouse and keyboard, make sure you guys do some research on that. Just search up mouse acceleration Windows setting. I guarantee you the first option will probably be there. I'll even link it in the description of this video if you guys would like to check that out. ADS mouse sensitivity is going to be on relative. I don't really touch this setting. It was kind of set by default. I don't really recommend using legacy. It's entirely up to you though. I don't really notice a big difference when using these two though. Inverted mouse look disabled, you don't need it. Mouse filtering 0. Mouse smoothing disabled, you don't really need that as well. And also your movements is something you're gonna want to mess with. Your slide behavior, set that to tap. Your crouch behavior set to toggle. Prone behavior set to toggle as well. Crouch, you could set it to tap to hold as well, but I'm not really a big fan of any of those settings, so I just leave it on toggle. Hold to use, I don't really leave that on either. And your keybinds, I'm not going to talk about keybinds because it's really entirely up to you. Even I still mess around with these to try and figure out what the best keybinds are for me. So you're going to have to just kind of, you know, play with your settings a bit and figure out what the best keybinds are for you. But for the most part, I leave almost everything on default. The only thing I would recommend you change by default is your crouch button. I recommend swapping that over to something else, maybe even a different side mouse button key that you don't use. You're swapping weapons. I think it's set by the default setting for swapping weapons is actually set to the scroll wheel by default, but I don't really recommend leaving on that. I recommend changing that to like a side button key on your mouse or something of that sort. So you're gonna have to mess around with that. Like I mentioned, keybinds. My keybinds are kind of all over the place. You may not like them, so you're gonna have to just play with them and see what works best for you. Weapons and equipment. Depleted ammo switch, leave that on enabled. Switch weapon minimum delay is at 80. Weapon switch wraparound is on enabled. Majority of these settings are set to default, so I recommend you just kind of leave these the way they are. Equipment behavior, you can leave this on pretty much hold. You don't really need to touch that at all. And obviously fire weapon ADS, leave that on default. Next weapon, you can set that to, like I mentioned before, this is set to the scroll wheel, but I'm actually gonna probably change the switch weapon feature, like your previous and your first weapon, to the mouse buttons on the side of my mouse. So I recommend you grab that, and that's obviously where a good mouse is going to come in handy. And pretty much everything else with kill streaks, I kind of leave this on default as well. Like I said, just play around with it, see what works best for you. Overlays and shortcuts, default as well. Menu navigation, default as well. And general. So if you're playing controller, you need to make sure that this setting is on before you queue into a lobby. If you're on mouse and keyboard, same rules apply as well. Your field of view is something that you're gonna have to maybe mess around with. Now I want to make something very clear, and my friend Accurate actually pointed this out. Shout outs to him. Make sure you guys check him out. Very good Warzone player and very knowledgeable in the game as well. If you are on controller playing on PC, do not set this value any higher than 103, because the reason for that is because anything higher than 103, even if I set this to 0.1, 103.1 or whatever, you're actually going to lose aim assist. Yes, the aim assist will not work for any value that is higher than 103. So if you're playing on controller and you want aim assist, leave this on 103. If you're playing mouse and keyboard, you can jack this all the way up to 120 if you really want to. It's entirely up to you. And advanced ADS field of view is on independent as well. I don't really touch that setting. Brightness, same thing as console. Horizontal heads up display, 100, vertical 100, skip introduction disabled. You can put that on if you want. I don't really care too much about it, but if you want to boot up your game faster, leave that on enabled. Tooltips, I leave it on enabled as well. And I don't want to reset that. Everything else, subtitles, I leave it on enabled. Colorblind, I don't touch colorblind. I mentioned that before. Majority of these settings I'm not really going to cover again because I did them on console. They're the same as console. I don't really touch them other than that. Your graphics on PC. Now, if you're someone that likes to alt tab a lot, leave this on full screen. And obviously the monitor that I'm using, I have 3 monitors hooked up right now, but the one I'm using is the one in the middle, which is my best monitor. So I'm using an Asus VS247 monitor paired with a GeoForce RTX 2080 graphics card. Obviously your display adapter is going to automatically do that for you. Your screen refresh rate, I have a 60 Hz monitor. If you have a 144 Hz monitor, this option is going to be different for you. I believe it sets it based off your highest refresh rate available on your monitor. So this will do this for you. You don't really need to change this, but if it's not for some reason, you know, altered like it should be, set this to 144 if you have 144 Hertz, 165, set it to 165, and so on and so forth. Render resolution, make sure this is set to 100. I actually made the mistake and wondered why my game was blurry. I think when I first booted up my game, it was set to 60 for whatever strange reason. I don't know why, but when I first booted up this game and downloaded it, it was set to 60, and I was wondering why my game looked like trash. So make sure that's set to 100. Basically what that means is that your game is going to be running at 100% render resolution. So if you set that game to 4K, it's going to be at the full 4K quality. And for my graphics settings, display resolution, make sure that's set to 1080p. If you have a 1080p monitor, which in my case I do, set that to 1080p. If you have a 4K monitor, set this to 3840 by 2160. But I don't have a 4K monitor, so I leave this on 1920 by 1080. Aspect ratio, set that to automatic. VSync, I don't touch VSync, but if you want to lock your frames and use VSync, you can do so. It's going to lock it to 60 frames. It's probably a better idea so that way you don't experience screen tearing, but that's entirely up to you. Custom frame rate limit, this is going to lock itself if you put VSync on, I believe. Actually, no, it doesn't. Oh, that's weird. Yeah, so I leave this on custom. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to hit 250 frames on this game playing on high graphics, but that's entirely up to you. If you have VSync disabled and you can handle getting more frames, then you can set this a little higher if you want, but that's entirely up to you. It depends on your monitor. If you have a 60 Hz monitor, play on 60 frames. Don't go any higher. Display gamma, don't touch that. Restart shaders installation, that's just for updates and whatnot. For the most part, I have everything set to high. If you're experiencing a lot of frame drops on this game, you can turn it down if you would like to do so. It's entirely up to you. I just kind of left everything on high. I don't really touch most of these settings. One thing I do recommend though, if you're losing a lot of frames and you're experiencing frame drops a lot in game, especially during crazy stuff like explosions, make sure your particle lighting is turned down a little bit. Maybe even put it down to normal a bit, because particles, any type of massive detailed particles in your game are going to massively slow down your game. So make sure you have that turned down a bit if it's messing with your game. DirectX ray tracing, I'm not a big fan of ray tracing, to be honest. I feel like it eats up a lot of your freaking graphics. But if you like the realistic aspect to your game, you can turn that on. but it's entirely, you know, a decisional choice. It's up to you type thing. Anti-aliasing, I set this to SMAA T2X. I don't really touch anti-aliasing at all. Like I mentioned, you will gain more frames if you turn this down. That's just, you know, a given. Depth of field, I leave that on enabled. Filmic strength, I leave that on 1. World motion blur, make sure that's all set default, or turn it off. You don't need it. Film grain, this was set to 0.25 by default, but I'm probably going to just turn it off. I didn't even realize I had it on before recording this. But for the most part, these same rules apply for a controller, and you'll have a nice looking game. And like I mentioned, just turn some of these settings down if you notice you're losing a lot of frames in your game. You'll gain the most frames by turning down particle lighting and also turning off ray tracing. Obviously, I have a ray tracing graphics card, so that setting usually is on by default, but it's actually not for some reason. Now, for your controller settings, I want to go over something that is not necessarily on console, and that's something that a lot of people didn't realize. And what this actually does is there's this new setting in the controller tab known as Scale Aim Assist with FOV. What this setting does is going to scale your aim assist based off of your FOV. So let's say in my case I have 103, which obviously isn't on console. This little bubble is going to get a tad bit smaller, so that way it can compensate for the field of view, which is a little bit bigger. And this is not available on console because you can't change your FOV. So if you're playing on controller, make sure you have this setting enabled, because it's basically going to make your game an aimbot, especially if you have all the aim assist settings that I mentioned in this video. But for the most part, everything else is set the same. When I first booted up the game, my dead zone was set to 0.05, but make sure to 0.10. Make sure that's set back to the same as console. So if you use 0.05 on console, use 0.05 on PC as well. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this. These are the best settings that I use for PC and controller. So if this helped you guys out, leave a like on the video. Helps your boy out. I really do appreciate you guys showing the love and support. Let's get 50 likes on this video, 150 likes on this video actually. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's your boy Carnage, your Primitive AK, signing out. Peace out, fellas.